Welcome to the Awaken on Purpose podcast, where each week you'll hear inspirational stories of heart-centered leaders who have awakened to their higher purpose and taken that leap of faith to follow their heart and make an impact in the world. Get ready to be enlightened, empowered, and transformed with your host, Jennifer Spohr.
I'm absolutely excited and thrilled to welcome as a guest to our show today, Anton Chumak Andryakov. He is a father, a husband, a business owner, a social change advocate, and a health fanatic. He is the current CEO of Prospective Force, a coaching company focused on helping people to work and live in a more sustainable way. His father passed at an early age, and that is why Anton has set on a mission to create more human sustainability in the world. He developed the 10% Fitter method to help change the idea of health. It is so much more than running faster, looking thinner, and doing more push-ups. Health is not the destination. It is the vehicle to all of your life goals. Welcome. So excited to have you.
As you read in my bio, my father passed away at a very early age. When I was only 8 years old. He was 45 when it happened, January 4th, 1995. And he passed from lymphoma, but before lymphoma, it was stomach cancer that split into the lymph, but ultimately wasn't that. Those are the symptoms that showed up, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. What my dad died from is from stress. It's from not taking care enough of himself as he took care of everybody else. Give you a quick story background on him. He was a mayor of my city back home in Russia. I was born and raised in Russia. And he was the mayor of a communist party of a city. And he was a big deal. He was recognized by Gorbachev in his final address to the union for the contribution that my dad made for the Communist Party. Now, I'm not a communist for all the listeners out there. I don't advocate communism, but that's my past. And what he did is he gave his life to his people. He, his job, and I'm sure with me and you will talk about this, but his job was his life. He was defining who he was through his job and how well he took care of his people. Now, I love that about him, and it taught me leadership and a very good stance. But what it always made me think about is, what if my dad had taken just 10% of that time for himself? Instead of giving all of himself away, what if he kept 10%? What if that 10% of self-care and nurturing allowed him to be around for 40 more years than what he was around, knowing all the things that he knew and being able to accomplish all the things that he was able to accomplish? Now add 40 more years to that human being. The things that he could have done is astronomical. And that's what I always preach to people is keep 10% of yourself. Keep 10% of yourself for yourself.
I love that. And I was wondering where the 10% actually came from.
There's two sides to that. The 10%, there's actually three sides to it. 10% is, that was the first place that number came from, is I don't think it requires more than 10% of our total attention or of our total time to really take great care of ourselves. In every stance of the word. I don't mean it just from doing push-ups and things like that. I mean nurturing our mind, body, and spirit all at the same time. Now, the other side of where 10% came from is that one of my favorite quotes in life is that 90% of change comes the last 10% of the effort. It's once we earn that knowledge to get to that last 10% of our growth, that majority of the change occurs. And those are kind of the two main things. And the last 10%, it's to combat the microwave society that we've created. And what I mean by that is we became a quick fix society. We want health yesterday. We want a six-pack in 21 days. We want to fix our stress with a quick 30-day detox, and just address symptoms real quick and be done with it. But that's not what actually happens. That's not what science and behavior change teaches us. So 10% in those three ways is kind of how it came about.
Earlier, you mentioned earning the knowledge. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's earning the knowledge, right? Like, imagine you're learning a new skill and you're trying to master, whatever it is you're trying to master. Say it's marketing, that doesn't matter. Majority of the output that you're capable of producing will not come from the first 90% of learning. That's foundational. That's if you're doing it right, it's meant to build on top of each other. And the first 90% is just kind of building that momentum. Most of the growth occurs in the last 10% of that knowledge. It's once we've gotten well above average knowledge, once we get to that nitty gritty, all the detail stuff, that's when we create most impact, most outcomes, and different things like that.
Gotcha. Anton, every experience in our lives, I believe, shapes who we are. And what experience in your life do you feel has been the most significant in shaping who you are today?
I'm going to give you two because these are very significant ones. I mean, there's been a few, but I'm going to tell you two that stand out more than anything that my mind always comes back to all these years later. The first one was my dad, which I mentioned, but there was a specific time that I remember that resonated with me, that made me be the leader that I am and strive to be a better leader to become like my dad, but at the same time taught me that I need to take care of myself. And it was my dad's funeral. And we lived in big, like if you think about project buildings in US, like these massive apartment buildings, like that's what we lived in Ukraine, like Russia, Ukraine, whatever, it goes back and forth these days where I'm from. And they had massive courtyards that we all hung out and played with, whatever. But when my dad passed, because this was 4 years after he was, done being a mayor, because it was 4 years after communism fell apart, Soviet Union fell apart. And they came prepared, like, okay, we're gonna have a lot of people here. So they brought a bunch of chairs, they really set it up and really tried to get as accommodating as possible. It was standing room only. That's how many people 4 years after he was a mayor came to, pay their respects to this man. And the funeral procession, they had to drive really slow because a lot of people didn't drive back home in Russia, and they walked. But there was 2 miles of people walking behind the casket to basically get to the cemetery and pay their respects. So that was ingrained into me what taking care of people should look like. This man never wanted anything for himself. He just wanted to serve and be better for his people. He was a true, he wasn't a politician. He was a true leader, but he held the role of a politician. And the second one was when I got fired from a role that I had. I didn't get fired from a company. I got fired from one manager role and put into another manager role. But me and you were kind of talking a little bit before, and we talked about how, defined who I was. That job, that career, I was a senior manager in a multi-billion-dollar company. I was only, 29, I think, at the time. But it had a huge responsibility. I became GM certified, one of the fastest in the company. So it had this track record that I was literally the golden goose. And it felt like I couldn't do wrong. And it was amazing. I was making six figures and everything was great. But then I got a bad boss. And who knows? Maybe I was a bad employee. I don't know. Me and this guy just didn't click. And I mean, he chased out a lot of good people. So maybe he was the problem, but who knows? And for the first time in my life, fortunate, 29 years of never having a horrible boss, I got this guy. And I realized that in order for me to move up corporate ladder, I had to play the game. And we all know the game. However the game shows up in different corporations, different environments, whenever there is a hierarchy, and if it's not set up right, that it's going to cause problems. And I realized that my entire being, my entire existence was determined by this one person. Two problems with that. One is that my being is not my job, but because I was considering it that way, I was seeing him being able to control my being. And the second problem is that I don't want to ever be in a situation where my future is controlled by somebody's opinion. And that's what the situation was. So those two were the biggest, shifts in my life. And they were probably about 20 years apart, but those are the ones that made all the difference.
There are just so many wisdom nuggets that you just dropped in what you said. And I'm sure yeah, so many people I know, including myself, can relate to what you just outlined in terms of your corporate experience and having a different dynamic and a not so great dynamic with your boss. The first thing that really stood out that you mentioned was about not being your position, not being your career. And that's what happened on my own journey a few years ago. I had spent most of my adult life prioritizing my career over everything else in my life. And when I wasn't working, I was prioritizing what everyone else wanted to do. And at the end of the day, once I finally hit that ceiling or hit that wall, I realized that I didn't really know who I was. It's like I had to rediscover myself. So many people define themselves by the work that they do, by their career. Someone asks you what you do, most people immediately respond with whatever their position is, right?
And it's funny that you mentioned that, like, as I was sending you my bio, if you asked me 3 years ago to send you my bio, the very first thing would have been my title. It would have been what I do professionally. Let me show this shiny little penny, and because that brings, I bring value, or more importantly, I give value to myself by presenting that title to other people. But I opened up with I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a business owner, I'm a social change advocate, and a health fanatic, right? So those are all components of me. And that's also not including my education, my fun, my different things. But what you're talking about, we as coaches, we deal with this a lot. This is why midlife crisis happens. Like this, in a nutshell, you define yourself as one thing, and then you get to a point in your maturity, or you hit a success high enough that gets you feeling really good. Because here's the thing, in order for us to define ourselves as a job, we have to have some degree of success in it. Because until a person's had that, they're not going to go there. Human nature is going to cause them, is going to get them to define it elsewhere. Something that's going to give them internal validation or external validation internally, in a different way. But once you hit that success, which you have in your job, I have in my job, then it's like, oh my God, this is great. This is what people like me for. This is what is amazing. And once that occurs, it's a really bad situation, because it shifts us away from focusing on the important things in life to now our job. And guess what our job does? Give me more, give me more. Yes, we want you to keep doing it. We want you to keep giving. Forget your family, forget your kids. And I'm not saying everybody's like that, but that's what the business corporate world is like. It's a dog eat dog world type of thing. So what was fortunate for me is that I found a book. It's called Living Forward. And this was probably about 2 years before I was let go. And this started my transformation, even though I was still considering, I was still chasing everything. But Living Forward made me understand that there's different parts to who I am. I'm not just my job. I am all these things. And I need to rank myself and strive to be the best I can in each one of them. And then what happened, because I started to shift focus, when that job was taken, I was depressed maybe for 2 weeks. I can't even begin to imagine, had I not found that book, Living Forward, how much depression I would have faced if I hadn't begun to make the mental shift of not just this one thing. So I feel incredibly sorry. Not sorry. Sorry is the wrong word. I feel incredibly I feel their pain. I feel the pain of these people in their midlife that get to the point, and you deal with a lot of this in your business, in your coaching, that they've defined who they were through this role. And now it's either taken, or somehow, some way, something shines a light and says, look elsewhere. Look at what else your life looks like. Look at all these neglected components of who you are. And those realities of having something taken or having our eyes open hit that midlife crisis. And that's what I think, I don't believe I'm going to have it. I may be wrong. I may be completely off my rocker, but I think as long as I keep focusing on having balance in all those areas, I don't need to be the best. I just need to be able to be good in all of them, or just good enough in my opinion. And then I can look at, okay, this one's doing bad, but here's 7 amazing ones that are doing great. Why am I just fixating on the one that's doing bad and forgetting about the 7 good ones? Right? You see what my train of thought there?
I do. And we could have an hour conversation just about how we define success, because, so many people are conditioned to believe that there's this cookie cutter way that you have to live life. There are these boxes that you have to check off the list. And I did it too. When I was in I call it my prior life, because pretty much everything's changed, at this point in the last few years. But a lot of people are conditioned to believe that success means this one thing. And I believe that it's really what success means to you, right? It's really about doing what brings you joy, doing what makes you feel good. And if the work that you're doing, whatever it is, makes you feel good, then that's what matters, right?
You're so spot on with success, because but I'm going to break down what you said. You said it's not about a list, but it is. Success is about a list and checking off that list, but who made the list and whose list is it? Right? That's because I think that we can't walk away from a concept of saying success requires action and an outcome. It does. And what I'm going to say is, in order to have the right success in life, predetermine what you want your outcome to be before you start the journey. Adjust it maybe a little bit as you go, but make sure it's your desired outcome. It's not superimposed by society, your parents, your school, your whatever it may be, 1,000 different factors that are constantly trying to pull us left and right. Make sure that list is your actual list. And it's not the mask that you wear, right? It's another thing that we mentioned before we got on the call, but it's not the mask that you've put on that now is creating this list. It's the real, authentic, deep down inside you that I say less than 1% of population operates that way. I think many are striving and many are getting there with time, and especially with this younger generation teaching us the right things. But I think that we do need to identify that success ahead of time and say, this is what I want my success to look like. But the key word is mine.
Absolutely. There's two key things that I want to touch on from what you said. And one is that outside influences can very strongly determine the decisions that someone makes for their life, right? Especially relationships. Relationships can really hold some people back, especially the relationships that are closest to them. Could be their spouse, their parents, their relatives, their close friends. When people are looking to make a change in their life, they expect to have that support from those closest to them. And the reality is that it doesn't always happen. And it's not because our loved ones have ill intentions. It's because they aren't always capable of understanding whatever path it is, that we're traveling, right? But because someone can feel like they don't have that support, in some cases, they may actually make the decision not to move forward. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's relationships. I mean, whether it be loved ones, it's people around us that constantly are going to add a degree of personal bias, right? It shifts us left and right. And sometimes, like you said, they may not understand, and that's why they're saying no. Or deep down inside, our success or our potential of success is diminishing their own self-worth. I've seen this a lot. I've seen this a lot where one partner holds the other partner back because they think if the other partner is succeeding, it's somehow making them be less. And I'm like, no, it's not. Of course, logically, it doesn't make sense, but emotionally, that's often what we do. But the crazy part is sometimes it shows up not very clearly. It's not even the other person understanding it, right? It's not the partner that's creating resistance. They may not even be creating resistance consciously. They're doing that through behaviors that they don't even understand. They're just reacting because deep down inside, it's hurting their psyche, potentially is one of the reasons why it's happening. Or there's alternative motives or whatever it may be. So what's important about these relationships is that we define people and we define in what scope of relationship it is, right? So like we have a relationship now. We've talked on the phone. We've engaged on LinkedIn and stuff like that. But the degree to which your relationship is going to impact compared to my wife's relationship is going to be different, right? Because we have different scope of trust and different scope of influence on each other. But at the same time, no relationship will be as high of a scope as my relationship with myself, because that is the most important one. And that's when it comes down to self-care. And why I talk about 10% fitter is not just about, push-ups and things like that. That's true health. Understanding that having a healthy relationship with yourself is the most important thing. So if your relationship with other people is causing you to have a lesser relationship with you, you need to really take a look at the relationship with other people.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue to the other point that I wanted to touch on, which is the importance of making space for ourselves. In my own personal life experience and in my experience in working with my clients, as a high achiever, there is also an element of the need to make everybody happy, right? And if we are more focused on pleasing those we work for and we work with and pleasing all of the people that are in our lives, and then how do we really know what we want, right? Unless we're intentional about making the space for it. Earlier you had mentioned looking at what's the end result that you want, right? And then backing into that. Well, part of the ability to do that is the importance of making that space for yourself each day, right?
It's funny you touch on high achievers. I used to call myself a high achiever coach until I realized it was Lila that actually, I think it was Lila or one of the conversations I had in her mastermind. And we started talking, and most high achievers don't call ourselves high achievers. That's why we're high achievers. I've really started to pay attention to this. And what I've noticed is many of us high achievers are also people pleasers. And it's for the same reason. It's insecurity. It's how insecurity actually shows up in a positive way. Sometimes as it makes us do more and push harder and always, not accept as enough is enough. There's positives to it. Of course, there's negatives to it. But it also shows up in people pleasing because we don't want to upset people. We don't want to make them feel negative because then it somehow impacts us because it's a reflection on us and our insecurity. But what I try to focus on this, because this is not coming from just clients, this is from me. I have always been a high achiever. I would never call myself that before. but it also comes from deep levels of insecurity and wanting to fit in and people please and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so what I've learned to do is looking at, if I'm people pleasing, am I actually helping them or am I hurting them? And what I mean by that is, am I only trying to positively impact them right now in this moment, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm going to hurt them? Is that the right thing to do? That's usually the internal monologue that I have if I'm seeing myself doing these things. I'm like, okay, I may hurt them right now, but does that hurt them or does that benefit them longer in the grand scheme of things? And I don't mean hurt them as in physically. I'm just saying, like, I may do something or say something that may not be perfect for them. But if in the long run it's better, then I need to be the right person and lead, because that's what leadership is about, and take that right action.
When you're saying that, what comes to mind for me is the difference between enabling and supporting.
Yep. I laugh because every time I hear this, it's a horrible thing. I laugh because I was so stupid to have not understood these things, right? And not understood the difference. I just about every podcast I've ever been in, I talk about March 2015. I lost 5 team members in the same month. That's crazy, right? You lost that much team. I mean, I had a team of 40, so it's still a good chunk, but not as bad. But 4 out of 5 cried in my office that they were leaving me and they were disappointing me that they were quitting. I couldn't understand this paradox. I was like, what do you mean? You're crying in my office. I failed you as a leader. You're quitting because you couldn't make enough money, and you're crying because you disappointed me. It makes no sense. And I figured out our relationship was really great. They're not leaving a bad boss. They're leaving because I enabled them and I said, it's going to be okay. They weren't doing the tasks that were needed to be done because they weren't not comfortable with them. So instead of pushing them and making them doing it, I just kept teaching them things and investing into them and hopefully trying to find a way of going around the problem where I should have made them face the problem and truly supported them versus enabled them.
It makes such perfect sense. It's so funny how often at the time we're experiencing something, we don't see it. We don't often see it until after the fact.
You should have seen me that month. It was crazy. Like literally I would come into it was my general manager at the time. I come to my GM office. I'd be like, well, so-and-so just quit. And of course, his mind goes like, well, how's your relationship with him? I'm like, go look at my scores. There were 5s across the board. He loved me. He just cried in my office, but he quit because he wasn't making money. It's like, I don't understand. It's like, I don't understand either. And I really started paying attention to it. I was like, it comes back to motivation, right? And then, I just took a class on this in managing teams and individuals. But until a certain level of income is reached, motivation of intrinsic type, where it's, kind of the why and emotional motivation, doesn't really work that well. You have to make bare necessities be met for your employees before you can bring that other stuff in. To that point, once that level of income is reached, the income stops working as a motivator as well. Now we have to use those intrinsic motivations. But I learned which one to use and when to use it. And that was a really hard lesson to learn.
Wow. Anton, there are a lot of people out there listening who may be at a crossroads in their life, right? Feeling unfulfilled, feeling like they hit that ceiling and they're feeling called to do more. What would be your number one piece of advice for those people? Something where they could take action forward today?
Here's the thing. I come from a foundation that people are innately good. We are, as a species, designed to be good. Because if you look at it, the way our reward system works, when you do good, you feel good. When you do bad, you feel bad. Our chemical design is to be that way. But there's things that happen because of our lifestyle, because of our environment, that change our chemical design. And when that chemical design becomes different, our mindset shifts, our behavior shift, our belief shift, our action shift, all of it shifts. So the advice that I come from is we need to understand our chemical design better as a species. We need to understand as an average society, not just from expert level, what our neurotransmitters do. For those listeners who don't know what a neurotransmitter is, it's your brain chemical. It's how your brain communicates, is using these things. And a lot of them make us do things or make us not do things. They motivate us, right? So many of these people that are listening, they want to be good. They want to go and make an impact on the world. And they're not doing it. And they're looking under every rock possible of why it's not happening. Or they're learning a new lesson or a new skill, but they're missing one important rock that they haven't turned over to look under. If your chemicals, your brain chemicals, are not where they need to be because your nutrition is not there, because your stress is too high. I mean, there's so many different reasons why it could be going on. You're going against the grain and you're blaming yourself that you're not good enough, where it's not a mental thing. It's not an action thing. It's a deep-rooted chemical response. And once you understand that, and you go, okay, let's say I'm not being motivated. What's responsible for motivation? Dopamine is one neurotransmitter that plays a massive role in that. So if I know that a motivation is lagging, what can I do to improve my dopamine receptors and improve my dopamine? So add tyrosine in, decrease stimulants. I'm not necessarily going to dive into detail, but the point that I'm making, there is a clear-cut answer that has nothing to do with somebody being not good enough or not knowing enough. It's simply that chemical response. So if you're struggling, for one, follow 10% Fitter and you'll see a lot of this stuff. But check out my live show. But we need to, as a society, expand our idea of health.
I love your advice, and I have a question for you. That chemical response, I mean, the reality, first of all, is that we are always enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
But my question is, do you feel that that chemical response is linked to belief as
100%.
well?
Because before we're a thought, we're a chemical response, right? And it's a dual approach. It's not like what came first, the chicken or the egg conversation. It's that your thoughts feed your chemical responses feed your thoughts. So if your chemical responses are off, your thoughts are going to be off, or it's going to be harder to feel those thoughts versus think those thoughts, right? So let me explain that. Feeling those thoughts is something that should happen right away. That's something that you don't have to worry about. You don't have to sit down and work on your monologue. It's just something that automatically happens. It's an instinct. And when our chemicals are off, that's the first thing that'll go. Instead of being in a state of, comfort and in a state of, relaxation and being present and feeling like you're among friends, you're walking around feeling like you're in a state of combat in an environment full of enemies. The environments are the same. It's your interpretation of them because of the chemical imbalances you have in your body. Right? That's what creates that issue. So with dopamine, I'll just break this one down real quick because it's one of my favorites to talk about because it's motivation and you inspire people. The show is meant to inspire people and take action. So dopamine is not, most people think it's what's released when I feel good. Yes, but actually designed for motivation, dopamine is released prior to the activity to motivate us to do the activity. So a certain amount of it is released into the bloodstream, the body, not bloodstream, but more in our brain. And it goes into a synapse gap between neurons. But neurons sense it and they say, okay, the receptors pick it up. They create the response that gets us to do things. But what's supposed to happen, the body basically assesses and it goes, the amount of work you're asking me to do right now, is it worth the reward I'm going to get? If the answer is yes, the body's going to spike that dopamine and we're going to be motivated to do that action. If the answer is no, or the answer is maybe, and I'll explain maybe in a second, it may not happen. So what is the maybe answer? So say you're wanting to get up and go and better yourself. You want to read a self-help book in the mornings, get a routine of, morning reading or whatever to start your day. So your brain wakes up in the morning and it has two options at that time. Your conditioned behavior, which has been most likely picking up a phone, checking your emails, checking your social media, whatever it is, a massive stimulant, by the way, that also gives you likes and important messages and makes you feel good. Or the second behavior of now you're going to make me read, now you're going to make me do things. Which one is your brain going to choose? Of course, it's going to choose the reading, not the reading, the social media and the phone. So because the dopamine didn't spike enough because it saw that alternative option. So we need to cut out the phone in the morning, take that alternative option off the table. So then the dopamine is enough to motivate us to want to read a book. But we don't think about it that way. We don't think about it from a chemical standpoint. We just think, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not motivated enough. That's why I can't start reading. No, you're just putting the wrong inputs in.
That's a very interesting perspective. And it just also totally makes sense. I mean, it really reinforces the belief that I also have that everything is connected, right? Our mind, body, and spirit. So if one thing is out of alignment, it essentially triggers a reaction, right?
So
yeah.
true. I mean, that in health is so important, but it's not just health. It's everything.
Right.
One of my favorite things that I focus on as a coach is I do a lot of root cause analysis. Like if I were to say my greatest strength in life, it's root cause analysis, being able to pull away from the noise and all the symptoms and get down all the way down to the bottom. And that's what I mean by that, because you could be having a motivation problem that is coming, lack of dopamine, but that may not be coming from technology. They might be coming from blood sugar abuse, because you're addicted to carbs and that is coming from stress. So you kind of peel this onion and you keep going down and down and down. You go, you know what, to fix your motivation, we got to go and fix your stress. And it's like, what? Like, it doesn't make sense. But if you start to connect the dots and see how it all weaves, you're like, okay, now I follow that chain. But I'll go even deeper than you. You practice, a little bit of Eastern medicine with meditation and things like that. Everything in the universe is connected. That's the concept.
Everything's energy. I could have a whole nother conversation with you about that. Yes,
for that reason, it's not even just about anything energy, because everything's truly is connected. We may not see it in space, but on an atomic level, there's a string that runs from my fingertip all the way to Pluto or whatever the planet may be out there. So
everything's a process of co-creation.
Every action has a reaction, so we need to become a lot more aware of our actions and those deep ripple outcomes that we don't see because we're only looking in front of our nose because we're so distracted with a 9-second attention span.
Yes, I'm just like waving my hands over here.
Preach, brother, preach.
Preach, Anton, preach. You know what? It brings me to the next piece, which is just the importance of faith as well. Because to your point exactly, there is this whole universe. Everything is connected. And what we desire to receive, there could be a trillion different ways that it could come to us, ways that we would have no idea. And it's so important to be open-minded, to have a willingness to take action without seeing the whole path ahead, to be flexible.
For coaches, for us, it comes back to what's the right internal monologue, right? If you say it's important to have faith, have hope, and it all comes back to what is your narrative that's running through your head right now? And if it's the wrong narrative, how can you change it? But you first have to become aware of it.
Yes, absolutely. Anton, how can someone find you? But actually, before you answer that question, earlier in our conversation, you'd mentioned a book that was pivotal for you, Living Forward. What is the author's name in case somebody wants to check that out?
Oh, God, you're asking me specifics. I'm such a macro person. Let me see.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, don't be. It's a good question to ask. Let me see if I can find it right now, and I'll tell you. Living Forward. It is available on Amazon, and it is written by Michael Hyatt and Daniel Harkavy.
Okay,
Michael Hyatt seems famous. I think Michael Hyatt's pretty famous. He's had a few.
Thank you for anyone who is interested in checking out that
book. Guys, I'm telling you, this book is amazing. Because what it is, it also comes with a PDF that's a guideline to has you fill out a bunch of questions and teaches you how to figure out your life plan. So definitely advise it.
That's awesome. And so how can someone, what's the best place for someone to find you if they want to connect with you or learn more about what you're up to?
I pretty much live on LinkedIn. So if you find Anton Chumak Andryakov on LinkedIn is good, you can go to, my website, prospectiveforce.com. That's my company page. My contact info is on there. You can go to humansos2020.com, which will be live by the time this airs. And it is my conference website that we're putting together for organizational human sustainability and teaching companies how to, manage their people better, but also coming from a standpoint of people need to learn how to be better employees better at the same time. So both of those have my contact. You can go on there and get my cell phone or email or whatever it may be.
Awesome. It was wonderful speaking with you. I mean, we could go on for hours.
Hey, when you talk about such great topics as you bring up, I mean, it's easy to discuss. It's all that existential conversations that we don't have enough of. So when you get engaged in that existential conversation, it's like, oh my God, give me more. I want more because, everything's, you're like trying to soak it all up.
Thank you so much for being a guest today. I just loved our conversation, and I know that so many listeners are going to get value from it too.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Awake and On Purpose podcast. Please visit us and subscribe to the podcast at awakeandonpurpose.com so you never miss an episode. To learn more about how you can connect with your higher purpose and take that leap of faith to make your impact in the world, visit us at jenniferspor.com. And while you're there, be sure to join our email list for exclusive offers and a weekly dose of inspiration.